After its establishment, the Sikh Foundation immersed itself in literary pursuits, publishing books and journals. But the course of history, set in motion in the Punjab in the 80s, engulfed all academic and artistic ambitions for now. The weekly newspaper, the Sikh Times, was launched in 1984. Full-page advertisements in leading American newspapers were published to educate Americans about Sikhs. Pioneering the display of Sikh arts, the first Sikh art exhibit opened in 1992 in San Francisco at the Asian Art Museum. Another major initiative was the establishment of the Kundan Kaur Kapani Chair of Sikh and Punjabi Language Studies, the first of its kind at the University of California, Santa Barbara, commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Sikh Foundation. The first permanent Sikh art gallery was established at the Asian Art Museums in San Francisco in 2003. In all, 7 Sikh art exhibits supported by the Foundation have been displayed at leading museums all over the world, including the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Smithsonian in DC, Rubin Museum of Art in New York, and the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. 3 chairs of Sikh studies set up by the Sikh Foundation at University of California campuses at Santa Barbara, Riverside, and Santa Cruz, and a Sikh studies program at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley are amongst the 6 endowed chairs and numerous programs running all over the United States with the support from the community. These chairs and programs create an enduring legacy, educating generations of students. With increasing number of scholars of Sikh studies, the field has expanded from religion and history to also include economics, conservation, and art. Continuing in our mission to create high-quality resources for the academic and artistic study of Sikhism, our latest publication, Sikh Arts from the Kapani Collection, co-published with the Smithsonian Institute, documents this unrivaled collection of art. As we look to the future, we think about new ways to maintain our connection with our past heritage so that our future generations can also be inspired, engaged, and educated all over the world.
Okay, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh, Sat Sri Akal, hello, and welcome to our 10th episode in a virtual series by Sikh Foundation International, exploring Sikh treasures around the world. We must start by saying that due to a busy November schedule and long-standing commitments, Sonia Tamiji could not join us for the episode today, but we do hope she's watching and we hope to see her next time. I'm Taran Singh from Birmingham, UK, and it is my pleasure to present this episode today. We started this journey in April this year with a 3-part series learning about the wealth of Sikh treasures found in London, UK, with my friend Rav Singh from A Little History of the Sikhs. We moved to the Indian subcontinent with presentations from an array of historians, academics, and researchers presenting fascinating accounts of Sikh treasures in Pakistan and India, in addition to a walk through the Kapani collection with our very own Sonia Tamiji. In this, our 10th episode, we are rejoined by Rav Singh, who will provide a virtual tour of Sikh history in Spain, Europe, and the nearby North African country of Morocco. Now, Spain and Morocco are not particularly associated with the Sikh diaspora, but in this tour, we will hear some interesting stories in relation to some fascinating individuals in history who have associations with the Sikhs. We hope to spend about an hour with you, during which Rav will take us to locations across cities in Spain and in Morocco. After that, we'll be able to take feedback and questions from you, which you can send to us through the chat window or on Facebook Live. Most of the images that we will share here are also available for viewing on our app, the Sikh Foundation International, on the iOS App Store. We thank you very much for all the positive feedback that you have sent over the last 5 months. We are delighted that you are enjoying these tours. All we now ask is for you to share this live session by clicking the share button on your screens. It will help us to connect with your friends and networks so they too can join you and see and learn about the amazing heritage on the tour ahead. So please do share this right now. So with that introduction and request, it's time to start to bring alive Sikh history in Spain. And it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, my great friend Rav Singh, who is joining us from London, UK. So over to you, Rav.
Okay, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you very much, Taran, for that introduction. Great to have you on the show with us on the screen this time. So Taran provided all of our IT training to myself and colleagues in Sikh Foundation back at the start of lockdown, way back in April, I think, when we were all trying to work out how to cross-link Zoom accounts on different platforms. So here we are now towards the end of the year, near the end of our series, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you some travels in continental Europe, which we have developed into a weekend study visit and city break. So we do go to Madrid on a study visit, and this is just highlights from that tour that we have. But before we get into the main part of the tour, I just wanted to reflect really on an event that introduced me to Sikh history in Spain. I'm going to take you back in time now. Let's go back to 1893. Now, this is called the Parliament of World Religions. And this photo in black and white here, this is the first Parliament of World Religions, and it opened in Chicago on the 11th of September, 1893. It ran for about 2 weeks through to the 27th of September, and it was the first organized interfaith gathering. Now, today, it's recognized really as the occasion of the birth of formal interreligious dialogue worldwide. And representatives from a wide variety of religions and religious movements took part. In that very first parliament, there was representatives of Jainism, Southern Buddhism, they called it, Zen from Japan, and Hinduism was represented by Swami Vivekananda. And he greeted the youngest of the nations. It was held in Chicago in America. He greeted the youngest of nations with the most ancient order of monks in the world, the Vedic order of sannyasis, a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. Quite interesting. They were also in that first parliament included Christianity, Islam, Baha'i, Brahmo Samaj, Theosophical, and new religious movements at the time. Spiritualism was also represented. However, the religions that were missing at that time were the Native American religious figures, Sikhs, and the indigenous and earth-centered religionists. It was recorded that they were missing. Now, these religious traditions, and these ones, were not represented until the 1993 Parliament. Now, that was convened, and that's when the Sikhs first arrived. Now, I came across the Parliament of World Religions of 2004, which took place in Barcelona. And I remember this as a prominent event. Now, we have a Jatha in the UK called the Nishkam Sevak Jatha, and they are from Birmingham, where Taran is, and I know Taran's very close to them in terms of the work they do. They took on the task of providing langar throughout the whole event to all of the delegates, every morning, every afternoon, and every evening. And I think that kind of put, for me, in the back of my head, something about a Sikh connection with Spain, a very modern Sikh connection, but it just sowed the seed in my head about Spain. Now, as Taran said in the introduction, Spain isn't a country that's associated with the Sikh diaspora. We look at East Africa, and we look at America and the US, America and Canada, we look at the UK, and now we look at Australia, New Zealand, and some countries in Europe, really Germany, Italy, and France. But Spain, I hope, I'm going to take you through the time in Spain. And this is where it is. So we are in Spain, next to Portugal, and we're going to look at Morocco. So this part of the world. We're looking at Malaga. We'll look at Barcelona. We'll go to Madrid. We'll pick up one of these islands here, Ibiza, and then we'll go to Marrakech as well in Morocco. And the main protagonist of all of our tours is going to be an interesting lady. Her name is Anita Delgado Briones. And in her biography, she writes, "I have told of my infancy and childhood thousands of times, and I'm certain those stories will be further repeated to remain on record." Now, this is going to be the main part of our presentation today. And it is really, for me, quite an interesting story. Now, although she says, "I have told of my infancy and childhood thousands of times, and I'm certain those stories will be further repeated to remain on record," in Spain, you will find lots of books about her. You will see TV documentaries about her, and you will see films and like long films on TV about her. And she is really Spanish Cinderella. But in India, she is really unheard of, you know, and there's no books printed in India about her. And I think within the diaspora community, I think I'm probably correct in saying she's relatively unknown. There's very few individuals I've come across who could say, yes, Anita Delgado Briones, the Kapurthala princess. One definitely is Peter Vance, because his work and his images that I sometimes see started to introduce me to the Sikh connection. So let's start this journey. So her story will take us through those cities I said. We're going to start in Malaga. Now, Malaga is a city on the south border of Spain. It's an airport that takes you all to the Costa Brava, so all the sea resorts. This is the Museo de Artes de Costumbres Populares, Museum of Art and Popular Customs. And it's located on Pasillo de Santa Isabel 10. And this building that it's in was really a monk's monastery, Franciscan monks. They constructed this in 1632. 1632, that's about as old as some of our gurus were, period. So the building is called the Meson De La Victoria, and it's a central patio with rooms around it. And it's typical of houses of the 17th century. So this is now a museum, and it explains the traditions of Malaga in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. So let's take a look at what is in here. Interestingly, when you walk into this museum, it has these paintings. This one is kind of a full life-size portrait of a lady called Anita Delgado Briones. And I'm going to take you through this story, but we're going to start with some of these paintings. And she is like Malaga's daughter made good, really. She is the Cinderella of Malaga. She was born to parents who ran a small restaurant in Malaga, and they had to close that restaurant after her grandmother died, and then they had to move to Madrid. This is her story. This next painting is also kept at the museum, and this one by a painter called Frederico Beltran, and he was a renowned painter of colour, but also a painter of women in, let's say, certain poses, as you can see, right? Many of his paintings, they're rich in musical and poetic references, and he painted this portrait of Anita Delgado in 1919, and it's now kept at this museum. And this final painting here, this is the third painting that's kept here in the museum. And this is a painting by a British Victorian painter called Edward Patry. Now, he painted this painting in 1907, very soon after her marriage. Now, I'll come back to this painting later in the presentation. I think what I want you to really notice is her headpiece here. Now, it is a peacock, and we will come back to this later in the presentation. So these life-size or huge paintings sit in this museum, and her story is told in Spain, and many people who are aware of the arts are aware of this story when she became the princess of Kapurthala, the queen of Kapurthala, or the Maharani of Kapurthala as well. And yet for us, we're relatively unknown. Now, some of my friends who may be watching, they have these second homes in Spain. And I keep saying to them, if you go to Malaga airport, then please, please, please go to the museum and please, please, please take some photos, because I want my original high quality photos of these paintings. And as yet, everyone keeps saying to me, oh, we want to go to the beach. We don't want to go to a museum. So if anyone here does go to Malaga and they do wish to see these paintings, please take some high quality images on your phone and then I can use them, please. Thank you. Okay, so what is her connection? Her connection is with this gentleman. Now, we still have lots of time, so I can try and read his full title here. His name is Maharaja General, His Highness Farzand-e-Dilband, Rashik al-Iqtidad e-Odalat-e-Inglisha, Raja e Rajagan, Maharaja Sir Jagatjit Singh Sahib Bahadur, Maharaja of Kapurthala. And then he has lots of titles after his name. I just want to slow it down a little bit here because most people are not probably aware of this gentleman. I think, how do we start this? Okay, so India under the British Raj had two types of territory. You had the British India and these princely states. Now the princely states were semi-sovereign principalities and they were governed by local rulers who were termed prince by the British government. Now they weren't called king or sultan or maharaja because that implication gave them a term that would mean that they would be equal to Queen Victoria or a British monarch. So what had happened is they started to call these the princely states. They were allowed to semi-rule themselves. And in Punjab, we obviously had the kingdom of Punjab, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and that kingdom was taken over in 1849 and annexed and joined to the rest of India. And these princely states had previously kind of had friendly relations with the British. And I think if we read any of the books, I think that the theory is something like, you know, they themselves were scared of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, so they saw a natural ally in the British because they would have been able to side with the British if relations with Ranjit Singh turned hostile in history. So what had happened is the British had all these princely states working with them. They had Kapurthala, Patiala, Nagba, Bawahalpur, Malerkotla and Faridkot in Punjab, and these what we call the Cis-Satluj states, they're just below the Satluj River. And this is Jagatjit Singh Bahadur. He was born in 1872. And he became Maharaja, or the Prince of Kapurthala, at the age of 5. And he took on full ruling powers at the age of 18 on the 24th of November, 1890. Now, what he was actually given was a privy purse by the British. Yeah, so he was basically pensioned off. So his kingdom was run all in essence by the British, and he was put on a pension. And that meant that he started a career as a world traveller. And he really became a Francophile. He loved Paris. He could speak French very fluently. And he started to be influenced a lot by French architecture, French customs. And when we get to later in the presentation, you'll see how he started to turn Kapurthala into the Paris of Punjab. Now, given his status and given his title and given his appearance and his wealth, obviously, and the fact that he was in Europe a lot of the time, he was invited to a wedding. He was invited to the wedding of this couple. Now, on the left-hand side here, you can see Princess Victoria Eugenie. Now, remember Sarah Ferguson's daughter Eugenie? They named her Eugenie after this lady who was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria, Princess Victoria Eugenie of Battenberg. And she was to marry King Louis XIII, King Alfonso Louis XIII, no, King Alfonso XIII. That marriage was going to take place in Madrid on the 31st of May, 1906. And in attendance at that marriage was Maharaja Jagatjit Singh Kapurthala. This is a painting of the wedding. Now, I've tried to look closely here, and this is where, oh, there he is. There he is. Look, there's Jagatjit Singh just behind the bride. If you look over the right shoulder of the bride, you can see Jagatjit Singh. My mouse doesn't work on here. But, oh, yes, there you go. There he is. This is a painting of that royal wedding. And this is Victoria Eugenie and King Alfonso XIII of Spain. And this wedding took place in San Geronimo on the 31st of May. And after this is quite an interesting story, because after this wedding ceremony, as they left, the royal procession was heading back to the royal palace in Madrid when an assassination attempt was made on the king and queen. There was an anarchist, Mathieu Moral, and he threw a bomb from the balcony at the royal carriage. Now, what happened was Eugenie's life was saved because at that exact moment that the bomb was exploding, she had turned her head in order to see St. Mary's Church, which Alfonso was showing her. So she escaped injury, but her dress was spotted with the blood of a guard who was riding beside the carriage. Now, a large statue used to stand in front of the San Geronimo Church to commemorate this event. And now it's a much smaller statue, but in pictures past, it's quite large. So here we are, we can see Jagatjit Singh at the wedding. It's quite interesting. Okay, so now Jagatjit Singh is in Madrid. He is attending the wedding, as you do. And Madrid, if anyone knows Madrid, it's a city that is in a state of, well, Madridistas say that it's a city in a state of permanent demolition. There's always cranes, always things being knocked down and built again. Now, this building here on the left at the top is the Curacao Foundation. Now, the Curacao Fronton are the foundations of a building which was a convent of Carmen. Now, the Fronton Central, or the Grand Curacao, let me try and work this out. Okay, so let's see. So this building was built in the early 1900s, actually in 1898. And it sat on another building which had foundations in relation to a convent. Now, what happened in this building was it hosted gatherings, meetings, and a dance hall. And the dance hall had a capacity of 2,000 couples. And actually, it's also recorded that the first boxing fights in Spain were also held here. Now, when we went to this square, the Plaza del Carmen, we went there. It doesn't really exist anymore. They said it's a Cine Madrid, the Cine Madrid, which is a cinema of Madrid, that had also closed in 2002. So let's think back to when Maharaja Jagatjit Singh came here. When he came here with the rich and famous of Madrid, there was a young dancer, and that dancer was called Anita Delgado. She was earning money as a Spanish flamenco dancer. She was performing with her sister as the curtain raiser act at this Curacao Fronton. It was popular with Madrid's wealthy, and it was frequented by international visitors. And it was here that the Maharaja watched her performances when he was attending that wedding. And he began to court her. And he convinced her to meet him in Paris. Now, she came from a Catholic family, and they were very against this proposal that had come in from the Maharaja. But he persisted in his ways, and he convinced her to meet him in Paris. So let's see. Eventually, after I think lots of gifts were exchanged, they married. And they married according to Sikh rites. It was an Anandagaraj ceremony on the 28th of January, 1908. Now, this character here, Maharaja Jagatjit Singh, if you have a look at some of his baby photos, he was very, very portly. But he's obviously in his later life, he slimmed down quite a lot. And they say, I was reading some interesting biographies, and they said when he was 18 years old, he had an attendant to help him with his portly stomach to get on horses and elephants and things like that. But obviously later in life, he has lost a little bit of weight. Now, this is Anita Delgado here. And she is with her Maharaja after the marriage. And then she was taken to Paris. And at Paris, let's move on. Let's go to the next slide. And here she is in Paris. And she began training to become a queen. She learnt etiquette, French, and other languages. She learnt to dance, she learnt to skate, and she learnt to drive a car. And then in 1907, I remember what did I say, when she was born, 1890, so she was only 17 years old. She left Paris to go to India, ready to be a queen. Then she became, her name was changed, and she became Maharani Prem Kaur Sahiba of Kapurthala. Kapurthala the Maharani Prem Kaur Sahiba. Very, very interesting, because I think she was unaware that she was the fourth wife of Jagatjit Singh. So as she arrived in Kapurthala to the royal palace, and she realized she was wife number 4, that was news to her, because during the courtship there was no mention of another 3 more established or prominent wives of the Maharaja. And what happened was basically they started to travel a lot. They traveled around Europe and India, and she wrote a book at the time called Impressions de mis viajes a las Indias. That's one here. I think there's a copy I've got, but I'll show you this later on. But it's all in Spanish and in French. So what happened during the First World War, her husband kept going to and from Europe, and she would join her, and they were running Franco-British hospitals. And she was being decorated with jewels, lots and lots of jewels. Those jewels were said to be worth millions, and we're going to be having a look at some of those. 1825. We can keep slowing it down. Let's see. Melorio de Mitz. Now, this is a famous French jewelry house. It was founded in 1613. It's now got its headquarters in France, and it has a branch in Luxembourg and Japan. And the Melorio cut is a 57-cut jewel, which is an eclipse-based oval. So that's the diamond. There's a Melorio de Mela shop in France, and it's one of the longest established companies that cut jewelry. There's an international club, the Henokians, and only families with a 200-year history of diamond cutting are allowed to join that club, and they are probably one of the founding members. So, Melorio, why am I talking to you about the Melorio? Because, let's look at some of her jewels, because the Melorio is the company, the jewel house that made this impressive piece. Now, do you remember when I took you to that painting? Let's go back to it. Let's see if I can find it. This one. You see this peacock? And that says 1907. And let's go back to this. This one was made in 1905 for Jagatjit Singh, the Maharaja. Now, this item here, which is in that Patry painting, has 2,000 diamonds. 2,000 diamonds in that, together with all the other exquisite work that's taken place. And Anita said that she recognized that brooch as being the one that Jagatjit Singh, the first time she saw him at the Curzon Fountain. But when I look into Anita Delgado, and when you look at auction houses, you find that they had lots and lots and lots of jewels. I think we could carry on for some time if I just went through item by item of jewelry magazines that go through the jewels of Anita Delgado. And these are the jewels that we know of, yeah? This next one here, this is quite an interesting piece here, because this does have an introduction or a link to India. Now, emeralds were introduced by the Spanish in the 16th and 17th century to India. Colombian emeralds were revered by the Mughal emperors, and not only for their beauty. What they said was the larger the emerald, the more it was about the spiritual veneration to the gods. They looked at emeralds as symbolizing the force of life, because green is flora connected by a blue sky, and combined with the yellow of the sun, with spinels of rubies, which represented blood and the life force of the animal kingdom. So this is an amazing piece of work here. It's a stunning Art Deco emerald, diamond and rock crystal work. Now, this actual emerald was made in 1905 by Jagatjit Singh before he met Anita Delgado, and it was made for his elephant. He had an elephant in the royal palace, and the headdress of that elephant had this emerald. Now, when Anita Delgado got to Kapurthala and saw this, she was amazed and she loved it, and therefore it was taken from the elephant, and upon her 19th birthday, it was set, this brooch, which she is wearing on her head. And that's the famous image you see if you Google Anita Delgado. Okay, this is the one I was just talking about with the auction houses. This one was auctioned on the 12th of December, 2007 at Christie's in London. And again, it was, the auction was of jewels from a fairy tale romance. And I'm not going to even try and remember how much these things went for or the guide prices, because I get confused. But this is just one of a very, very many one of these jewels. So I've just picked the three favorite ones that I picked out was the peacock, because of the link to the painting at Melior's in Paris. We're looking at the emerald, which belonged to the elephant of Jagatjit Singh. And when it was her 19th birthday, it was given to Delgado. And this last one's a necklace. I think it has two matching earrings as well in a similar style. But again, it's all about emeralds because of this link that the green, the blue, the yellow, well, the blue of the sky, the yellow of the sun mixed together to make the green of nature, fauna. Okay, so what had happened, as I said, when she realized she became the fourth wife of Jagatjit Singh, and she was always traveling, she wrote this book, Impressions de mes voyages or Indes. Now, this is in French, I would imagine. It's not the Spanish version, but this should be downloadable on Google if anyone can read French. Otherwise, you can make out, I can try and make out what she says in these observations. And there are many. And she talks about the palace, her life, and then she talks about her travels in the main. So they went to Hyderabad, where the Nazim of Hyderabad tried to impress her with jewelry and gave her a number of special stones, which were later found to be fake. She talks about all her travels in India and seeing the range of different bits in India. And then she talks about her European travels. There's photos of her in Chicago, back at Paris, Morocco, which we'll visit, and Madrid. So this was her home. Now, I know some people are familiar with the Jagatjit Palace. Now, this one was, as I said earlier, Jagatjit was a Francophile, which means he was in love with everything French. And he had an enthusiasm for French architecture, which is reflected in palaces and various monuments of his time. And he started to make Kapurthala as like the Paris of Punjab. Now, this palace is not really all French because it has aspects of French aesthetics. It has a Darbar hall, which was used for ceremonial occasions, which is entirely Indian. And then it had bits which were Italian, which is all the pillars and all the palace features were all Italian. And then the roof is mansard. This is a double slope, small oval roof, which is called a mansard style. Now, I've come across a mansard roof over in London, and we had a mansard roof at the Houses of Parliament, but that got burnt down by a fire. And then we had a similar mansard roof at the Royal London Hospital. So I'm a bit of an expert in mansard roofs, seeing as it's one of my building projects at the moment. So I was delighted to see a mansard roof. This is a mansard roof here. And this is quite a high mansard roof. So all these amalgamation of his travels. So you've got Italy, the UK styles of architecture, then you've got French, and you've got a whole Indian decor. Was her home with the other Maharanis and Jagatjit Singh when they were in Kapurthala. Now, they did go to Morocco and they went to Marrakech. This was their honeymoon destination, Marrakech. And this, if anyone's been to Marrakech, and I'll come on to the pictures later, this is kind of the center in the old Jema El Fana, which is a huge market that surrounds this mosque. And this is a 12th century mosque. It's called the Kutubiyya Mosque. And if we say Kutubiyya, it's a mosque of the booksellers. Now, the booksellers surrounded this mosque, and that is what the Jema El Fana was all about. You know, it was all about books. But what has happened is in Morocco, they've changed it all. They've picked up the booksellers and they've moved them to another part of Marrakech. So in the old days, you would see the minaret of the mosque of the booksellers, and surrounding it was all to do with books. People took their time, they looked at books, and that's what happened. And all the booksellers would then visit this mosque. This dates back to the 12th century. Each bookstore was always family owned, and the role of the bookseller was kind of passed down through the generations. Now, as tourist trade grew and grew and grew in Marrakech, if anyone knows, it's kind of like it's a city in North Africa that has, I don't know, 360 days of sunshine out of every 365 days. The water system is kind of like an irrigation system that's brought in through the mountains. And the booksellers, as Marrakech started to grow, they were moved out. Many local Moroccans recognized that booksellers really should be in the heart of this Medina. But the government really wants to boost tourism. So what you actually have now, where you had this kind of nice strolling, take your time, read a book, buy a book, what you've got now is this, it's just full of hustle, bustle. Every night it's like a carnival. You've got snake charmers, monkeys, drumming circles, acrobats, belly dancers, fortune tellers. There's truly a lot of noise in this market. You know, we were there a few years ago. I was trying to work out if I could work out anything to do with Delgado and Jagatjit Singh at the mosque, but it was really, really difficult. I don't speak Arabic and I just couldn't get my point across, but I just took a load of photos. So what had happened is that on their honeymoon in 1908, they loved this mosque, yeah? They loved it. And what happened is the Maharaja was so proud that he created the mosque back in Kapurthala. And this is the Moorish mosque in Kapurthala, and it's based on the Maghrebi style, which was seen at Kutubiyya. Here you go. So you see the mosque in Marrakech, looks like this, and you have a near identical copy of it in Kapurthala. So I didn't really focus too much on the palace because this is my area of interest, because it was like his wife had said she enjoyed their time in Marrakech and she liked the mosque. And then he built it in 1930. At the time, this was pre-partition India. 60% of the population of Kapurthala was Muslim, and Jagatjit Singh built this mosque for his Muslim subjects in an Indo-Islamic style after visiting in 1922. I think they did multiple visits. So it's said that this put his unique stamp on Kapurthala's architectural landmarks, and it stands as a testament to the devotion to his people. And now, after partition, the mosque actually fell into disuse and neglect. But now, I think if anyone goes to Kapurthala now, you will see that it has been recently restored. This is what it looks like on the inside. Truly is amazing. It's all been restored to some degree. Now, we had these shows before on the restoration of buildings. But this, so whereas we were looking, I think with Diamond Sodi, we were looking at a structure which is at the start of a journey. This project has been completed, so you can actually access this one. And I just want to bring up something else interesting that comes to mind now, because in our last talk, we looked at Dr. Nadra Khan. She was from Lahore. She was telling us about all the great artisans in Punjab, like Ram Singh, and she took us through a list of all the others there and all of their skilled work. But what happened is in the early 20th century, that patronage, which usually came from the Maharajas or the kings of the time, that patronage was moving to Europe. That's where I was trying to pick up, and it comes to me now. That's when Jagatjit Singh, instead of employing the locals, the local skilled artisans, because he was such a Francophile, because the Maharaja of Patiala was also visiting London regularly, because the other Maharajas were regularly coming to Europe, because they were all on huge pensions, so they could afford to do so. They were actually patronizing the European diamond and jewelry houses and actually ensuring their survival. So Cartier was being given multiple assignments by the Patiala family. The Kapurthala family was keeping Melorio in business. And Nadaraji said last week that, you know, it's a testament to the skills of the people that those skills have survived, because they went through a period where they were not being commissioned as much to do their work. So all of this European type style of jewelry was really because the kings and the queens were really patronizing the West rather than the skilled people in the East. Sad. So let's go back to Marrakech. Yes, so they built this mosque in the style. So it's very interesting for me. So you've got the Paris of Punjab with, you know, a mosque that looks near identical to a mosque that is in Morocco. Very interesting. So let's move on now. Where am I going to next? So in terms of the Maharaja and his wife, they did have a child. His name was Maharaj Kumar Ajit Singh Sahib Bahadur. And he was born on the 26th of April, 1908. And I want to come back to his life later on because his story starts from his mother in a different way. But he was educated at Cambridge and he went to the military academy in Dehradun in India. And his life took him to become the Indian Trade Commission to Argentina. But I want to come back to him later on because I want to talk about in his childhood, I think he was suffering an ailment. Like we do in Punjab, we make a promise sometimes, you know, and we make a promise and we say, you know, God, please look, you know, please save my child and I will patronize something, you know. And that's what his mother done because his mother was a Catholic, right? So she was a Catholic by birth, although she had marriage according to Sikh rites. And she was associated with this church. It's called the Museo e Basilica di Santa María de la Victoria. So let's look at this. Now, this is, again, back in Malaga. So this is her hometown from her birth. And there's a museum dedicated here. And it's one of the most important churches in the city of Malaga. It was declared a monument in 1996 because it has this image of Santa María de la Victoria. Now, this monument of Santa Maria was donated by Anita Delgado when she was the Maharani of Kapurthala from Malaga. And she had credited the healing of her son from an ailment to the Holy Virgin Mary. So inside here it is. So this is the Santa Maria de la Victoria, which is a tomb. I think this is downstairs at the bottom. It's also said here, now because I haven't been to Malaga yet, I haven't been able to take my own photos, but in this museum, it also had these jewel-encrusted dresses and jewel-encrusted jackets, the diamonds, rubies on clothes, and those clothes are kept here at the Museo of the Basilica di Santa Maria. And again, it's credited to Anita Delgado, the Maharani of Kapurthala. Well, that's an interesting one. So if anyone does go to Malaga, doesn't just want to go to the beaches, then you've got two places to go now. Museo de Malaga, the Costumbres Populares, and you've got the Basilica di Santa Maria de la Victoria. Good. Now, I'm going to try and continue her story. We're going to be finished quite early, but that's okay. So I'm going to continue the story. I don't think anyone can recognize who this gentleman is. But the story goes something like this. The marriage took place between Delgado and Jagatjit Singh. They're spending a lot of time traveling, but after 25 years, they have a divorce. And so you would expect that in this divorce settlement that Anita Delgado isn't really going to come up trumps here, right? She's going to maybe be left destitute or return to Spain. But this gentleman comes into the mix here. And I thought this was quite interesting from the life stories in Spanish that I managed to deduce. I'm not going to tell you who it is yet, but let's just say he was a lawyer. He was in London at the Savoy Hotel, and he witnessed an argument between Anita and Jagatjeet at the Savoy Hotel in London. And that argument resulted in Jagatjeet being quite disrespectful to Anita. And in the arrangement that followed, this gentleman took on the task of securing a settlement that if she left the marriage, that she would be financially able to support herself and her son. And I just wanted to I just put this in yesterday because I thought, wow, this is, every little quirk of history comes in. I couldn't recognize this image of this lawyer. If I do press the button here, it's him. It's Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who's the founding father of Pakistan. In the 1920s, he was a practicing lawyer in London. And he took on the Delgado case and he secured a very favorable settlement for Anita, which meant that she could return to Europe, to Madrid or to Paris, have residences with a secretary. Most of her jewelry was given to her. The ones that I showed you were the ones she had with her most of the time. But they also sent trunk loads of jewelry from Kapurthala via Bombay or Karachi and put them on a ship. And that ship was set sail to Europe. And it is recorded somewhere that that ship didn't reach Europe, it was sunk. So somewhere in the Indian Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean, there's a ship with a trunk load of jewels that belongs to Anita Delgado. If there's any young Sikhs there who want to do deep sea diving and want to earn millions and millions of pounds, because I think there are companies that do that, just dive looking for shipwrecks from the last 100 years. There is a trunk load full of emeralds, rubies, diamonds for Anita Delgado. And I just thought it was really interesting that when Jinnah was practicing as a lawyer, he took on this case and he ensured that Delgado had a very favorable settlement. So that kind of starts to take the story through to the final slides. Now, this is her son, as I said before, Maharaj Kumar Ajit Singh Sahib Bahadur. And he passed away in 1982, born in 1908, so he was about 74. But after the passing of his mother, he took it upon himself, because now obviously his mother is no longer part of the Kapurthala family. She's kind of exiled to Europe, although she has a nice settlement to sustain herself. She's exiled, but her son had a very close bond, obviously, with her. And it takes us to this bit here. Now, we were in Madrid last year. So we were there on the 1st of June, 2019. And being Punjabi, like my cousin and I, we had the cheap tickets. So you have to fly in very early and fly out very late. Now, we'd been there Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We didn't get to see the match, but we experienced the match. Liverpool obviously won. And then we were there Sunday. And then we were there Monday. So on the Sunday night, I was ringing home, right? Nothing to do. Sonny said, what do you want to do tomorrow? I don't know. What should we do tomorrow? I don't know. And then my wife goes to me, why don't you do some Sikh history? And Sonny goes, I don't mind if you want to do Sikh history. I'm like, how am I going to find Sikh history in Madrid? In the back of my head, there was a name, Anita Delgado. I didn't even know it was Anita Delgado Briones. But when you're in Spain, in a Spanish hotel, they kind of assume you're Spanish. So going to search engines and trying to look this stuff up, it was a mission. And I didn't sleep that night. And I just looked and looked and looked. And I found a picture. And that picture was this bit here on the left. And I found this picture on a website. And it said the grave of Maharani of Kapurthala is in Madrid. I was like, well, if it's in Madrid, then we've got to find it tomorrow, Sally. We've just got ourselves a mission, right? We're going to go grave hunting. And we ended up at the Sacramental San Justo. And this was probably, we aimed to be there early, but we probably didn't even set going till about 11. And we got on a bus and we headed out of central Madrid. We were trying to find this Sacramental San Justo, which is actually a cemetery. And it's on a hill and it looks down on the whole of Madrid. And we could actually, it was near the old Atletico Madrid stadium. They had moved for the Champions League final. That's why I had it there. And they had this old, so I could see the stadium, I could see the cemetery, okay? And in my head, I'm thinking, Anita Delgado Briones, Maharani of Kapurthala, she must be like near the top with the mayors, the kings, the poets, everyone in Madrid who had literature, artists. They have this huge graveyard at the top, and it's in 3 parts. And the tombs are very beautiful, and they're decorated. And we were like, okay, she's here somewhere. So we started right at the top. We were looking, we went there with no water, no food, thinking it must be clearly marked. You know, it can't be easy to find a grave. It can't be that hard. And until you get there and you realize there's thousands of graves and thousands of famous people and then thousands of normal people. So it's actually in P4. And we probably started way at the top and we had to end up getting to P4. So this was on that day. So, and the main thing was we saw this base of a cross. So I just said, Sonny, we have to find a grave with a cross on it. But the image I had didn't have a cross on it. The image I had was just like a square. I think I caught a little bit of a cross, and we found it. And on it, it says, S.A. Maharani Prem Kaur of Kapurthala, María Delgado Briones, died on the 7th of July, 1962, aged 72 years. Your son does not forget. And it has crown for Kapurthala, and it has a karban or a sword of Kapurthala. And the full picture is here. It's a Prem Kaur of Kapurthala. Here lies María Delgado Briones. Your son does not forget. So although when I started this, I said, you know, we don't even know this story. It's not really Sikh history, but it has a lot of links with Sikh individuals. And the Spanish, maybe don't forget. The son does not forget, but I think the Kapurthala family have not really paid any attention to it from her side. They've always looked at it from Jagatjit Singh's side of the story, which is interesting, not from the individual, the lady herself, you know, who wrote a book about it. So that takes us to the end of this part of the presentation. I'm just going to come on to some of the stuff I found on that night in Madrid. It was this book. It's called Javier Moro, The Dancer and the Raja, a novel. So it says on the 28th of January, 1908, a young Spanish woman sitting astride a luxuriously bejeweled elephant enters a small city in northern India. The streets are packed with curious locals, anxious to pay homage to their new princess, with skin as white as the snows of the Himalayas. This is the beginning of the story, based on real events of the wedding of Anita Delgado and the wealthy Maharaja of Kapurthala, a grand story of love and betrayal that took place during almost 2 decades in the heart of an India that was on the verge of disappearing. So that's the Spanish one. I haven't found an English version of the novel yet, quite hard. But equally, there's a beautiful website. It's called kapurthalaprincess.com. And it's done by Elisa Vasquez de Gay. She's basically the biographer. And I have a copy of the book. I can't see myself on it, but I have a copy. And I do try and read Spanish to cover it. And because we know enough names from India, you can actually work out. So there's her travels in Bikaner, then Hyderabad, then she went to Burma. It talks about all of this stuff in here. Probably not easily available, but it can be found with the right keywords. But she's the official biographer, Elisa Vasquez de Gay. It looks at her experiences, and she starts the book. My name is Anita Delgado Briones, and I am the Princess of Kabul. Just having that start gets you hooked, really. And there's that elephant, the elephant which had that emerald on his forehead, which she had on her forehead later. So let's move on. We got to carry on in Spain because I did say I'm going to take you to Ibiza as well. So this is Maharaja Paramjit Singh. Now I'm really trying to work out how all these Maharajas of Kapurthala are connected, and I'm struggling, but let's just start with Maharaja Paramjit Singh and Maharani Brindra of Kapurthala. And this is them in the photo on the left, on the right-hand side, and their 3 daughters. Let me try and guess this up. Urmila, Sushmila, Indira. And this is the Maharani herself, Brindra. So this is a magazine from the early 1920s. And we're going to introduce you to Indira. So Indira was the oldest of the three Kapurthala sisters, we used to call them. And the interesting story about Indira is that she has a connection to Ibiza in Spain, which is good. But I just want to tell you a little bit before that. She actually arrived in London and she lived in Chelsea. I don't think we went to her house on one of our first London tours, but these are images that Peter Bance has in some of his books. I think he has some of the originals as well. She was Rajkumari Indira Gaur Devi of Kapurthala, who wanted to be a film actress. So she came to London to train at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. She had this look, which was very fashionable at the time, it was said. But in the 1930s, when she was in London, World War II broke out. What that meant was that there was no appetite, as the whole industry basically closed for the filmmaking industry in London. And what she found herself doing in that situation was becoming someone called a radio princess, because obviously she liked to be in the dramatics and the telecom world. BBC had been working, and she was planning to become that Hollywood star, but she actually started to drive ambulances during air raids in World War II. But then she joined the BBC and she became known as the radio princess, Princess Indira Devi. She broke several barriers about what was considered to be appropriate. She became like a feminist icon. When we say a radio princess, she was actually giving all the bulletins in Hindi to all the soldiers from India, which were stationed in the Middle East. So her broadcasts were in Hindi to give them news and updates and things like this. But she was also a journalist, and she was also one of the first female journalists that were allowed to report from the House of Commons in the UK. So there's all these little interesting histories. So the reason she's connected to Spain is after she retired from the BBC, she lived on the island of Ibiza, which is here. So Ibiza are these Balearic islands belonging to Spain. So we have Menorca, Mallorca, and Ibiza. And I haven't been to Ibiza. I didn't think there would be any Sikh history or any links to any Sikhs in Ibiza. But when you start digging and digging and digging, you do find them. And I don't know why. X is at the top, but that's my bad. But yes, she lived her last years in Ibiza, where she passed away on her island in Ibiza. So we are exactly nearly an hour on from the presentation, which is good. So I just want to reflect back. I think I'm going to do the closing slides as well. And I've stopped reading my notes, so I don't even know. One second. So this grave, I just want to get to you. It's plot 4, grave number 395. If anyone enjoys going to find these stories, it's grave number 395 in plot 4. Don't walk right to the top. You'll pass plot 4 before you get to the top. The funny thing was Sunny and I spent about 5 hours in here. And when we got to the gate at the end, it was closed. And we had to climb over a wall, we thought, but we didn't, because we tried to read a bit of Spanish. It said a tourist entrance. I don't know why tourists would want to go to a graveyard, but it said a tourist exit for non-opening hours. So just make sure you go prepared. Water, a cloth to clean things, and you'll find it. So that's my notes there. We've got the novel, this one. Right, good. So what we're seeing with Princess Anita Delgado is a Western woman. Now, I spoke to Professor Eleanor Nesbitt from the Warwick University. I spoke to her in about August time, I think, or early September. And I said to her, Eleanor, I'm going to try and put together a presentation on Anita Delgado, but I've got to fill up an hour. And I said to her, I'm trying to get through the Spanish side. And Eleanor has a book coming out next year, which is quite interesting. And the book is about Western women and their observations of Sikhs, I think, which is interesting because the book was supposed to be out this year, and I think because of the pandemic, it's been delayed, but it will be out next year. But today, she has a publication, which is in the Sikh Research Journal. It's the lead article, it's the first article in there, and there she's writing about Sikhs in the writings of Western women novelists. And I think that's picking up a lot of J.K. Rowling stuff and about how Sikhs are portrayed in the work of J.K. Rowling, which is interesting. But when I spoke to Eleanor, I was talking to her about all the different European women. We're looking at Emily Eden, we're looking at wives of Jagatjit Singh, who were French, Czech, and Spanish. And there's a whole plethora of other Irish Protestants, women and missionaries who found themselves in India and were making observations on the Sikhs. She's managed to capture them and put them into a book and tell a story, which I think is going to be very, very interesting. But today, if you want to log on to the Sikh Research Journal, which is at sikhresearchjournal.org, you will find a paper as the lead article about Sikhs in the writings of Western women novelists. But the interesting thing Eleanor said to me was that Rav, she was the only Catholic, that Catholics were quite, well, kind of the original Europeans, so quite favoured maybe, they had no reason. But then this courtship between Jagatjit Singh takes over, and I think he kind of doesn't give up. But she's the only Catholic who found herself to be in Punjab. Many of the others from other denominations. Interesting. Right, where are we up to now? So I'm not going to bring Dylan back in. We're dead on 7 o'clock, so I've timed it quite right. So what we're going to do, I do need to do some thank yous first. So I do want to thank the Sikh Foundation team. So normally we have an exchange between Sonia and I, and we do a few questions in the middle and we take a few observations, but I just rattled through the slides, and I hope it's been okay. I hope it's been enjoyable. I have no idea what Facebook's doing at the moment. I have no idea who's commenting, but Taran will save me in a minute if there's any questions soon. So I just want to end here by saying thank you to Taran for co-hosting at the beginning. Thank you to Cosma and Tanmeet Gujral for all the sessions to practice on the technology. And thank you sincerely to Sonia Damiji, who without many slides allowed me to do this presentation for you. I am really conscious and really aware this is not traditional Sikh history, but it's a story that I thought today people may enjoy. We are going to put some images of this on the Sikh Foundation app from the presentation, so you can look up those there.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a lovely week ahead of you. And we'll see you next time. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.